Psychoanalysis, diagnostic systems, let 5 flowers bloom. Namaste. Those of us who have studied mental health post-advent of DSM-5 have been hardwired to believe it is the only diagnostic system rationally possible. However, psychiatrists and psychotherapists of the old have seen DSM versions radically different from DSM-5 and also alternate diagnostic systems. Journey today is to open our minds on fundamentals related to diagnostic systems and contemplation thereupon. Guide for discussion is psychoanalysis consultant, Dr. Himanshu Vaidya. Namaste, sir.
Namaste.
So we start off with what the current beliefs are on DSM-5.
The current beliefs are, it is the only system that is rationally possible to devise. There is omnipotence attributed to the system. There is also a certain degree of fanaticism related to the system. And those who have not seen previous versions of DSM evolve, especially from DSM-2 to 3, because DSM-3 is a radical break. 4 and 5 are like organic evolution out of 3. But 3 is radically different from 2. DSM-1 and DSM-2 were largely anchored in psychoanalysis. DSM-3 took a radical break and became what it is today. Not subscribing to any particular system, or theoretical. So 4 and 5 are organic developments of 3. 3 is radically different from 2, and that is because of a famous research study carried on, which we'll not go into today, but 3 is radically different from 2. Now, many who have grown up with DSM-4 or 5, they have no idea as to how 1 and 2 were radically different from 3, 4, and 5. And therefore, this system has now become more of a belief that this is the only rational system possible, when in fact it's one of the players in the contest. There is a multitude of diagnostic systems possible, each with its strengths and weaknesses, each with its good area of application. However, the general feeling, unfortunately, is that this is the only system which is possible. And this has become the language of discourse and has almost become mandatory, that if you have to be in the mental health field, you ought to know DSM. That's the language of discourse. And another myth about the system is that it's a scientific system. It is a system based upon science. It is not a scientific system. It is a half scientific, half cultural system. And therefore, there is no need to think about it the way you would think about a blood report. You can also see that how difficult it is to apply this system, because not only is it half cultural, because this system does not go into causality. DSM has 3 characteristics. It is theoretical. It does not go into causality. It does not go into healing. All it does is provides you a basis for diagnosis. That's it. Why it has happened, what has happened, it doesn't go into it. What to do now, it doesn't go into it. It only tells you what has happened to you and gives it a name. Now, as we saw in the discussion on Beyond, the advent of a truthful name closes the infinity and the distress of infinity. So that good part DSM does do. DSM, do you get the sound?
Yes, sir. But it wasn't too much.
Are you hearing only my sound or something else also? Sorry?
Sound is audible.
So DSM has provided an objective, consensus-based language for discourse, but there are many difficulties with DSM. And it's an evolving thing. It's not a scientific thing. It is something based upon science, but not a tight scientific system. You can look at how homosexuality was dealt with. You can look at how gender is being dealt with. You can see the coming in and going out of certain sicknesses. You can see the exception in every chapter, other specified and unspecified, which tells you how loose the system is. You can see the personality disorder chapter, where in practice you find most of the personality disorders as mixed personality disorders. And the same person gets diagnosed for multiple things. So this is a system which is not strictly a scientific system, but it has got marketed as such. What DSM is actually it's a common minimum program to which every player in the mental health field, so to say, can agree upon and become a common language of diagnosis and discourse, but by no means the best one or the only one.
So what are the fundamental axioms underlying the DSM-5 diagnostic systems?
Yeah. So every diagnostic system, and there are multitude of it, we'll see it today. Every diagnostic system is based upon certain axioms, certain fundamental philosophical principles on which the system is based. DSM is based upon four fundamental principles. One, it is a-theoretical. So it does not believe in Freudian theory or Kleinian theory or CBT. It is a-theoretical. Second, does not go into causation. It's causation free or causation independent, let me see. And it does not go into healing. Whether a person diagnosed for phobia should go for psychotherapy or should go for medication or should go for CBT, DSM doesn't go into it. It is based upon diagnosis on cluster of clinical symptoms or clinical signs and symptoms. So it's a cluster trait approach, that if you have this cluster of reported symptoms or signs reported in the clinical setting, then you can be diagnosed for X. Let's say depression, they would say these are the 13 qualifying traits for depression. If you have 9 out of 13, you can be diagnosed as being depressed. And then you can look into the intensity of it, minor or major. So it's a cluster-based trait cluster approach where you list out the traits and then you say, if out of X you have Y, you can be diagnosed or you cannot be diagnosed. So it's a trait cluster approach. It is based upon reported signs and symptoms. It is not based upon any X-ray or CAT scan or a blood report. It is based upon what is reported by the patients or the informants or the caregivers or the victims. It is based on reporting, clinical reporting. It's not based upon anything else. It does not go into any preventive, either at the individual or the social level. So these are the core, and it gets revised every 4 or 5 years. And now the idea is to have a continuous revision and make it as empirical as possible based upon the reported and the observed entities. They don't go into the intrapsychic. So these are the axioms on which the DSM is based: a-theoretical, causation independent, healing independent, and based upon empirical reporting or empirical observation.
It brings us to what alternative systems exist.
Alternative systems are many. The healing world is such that your healing method is a function of your pathogenesis. how you believe sickness develops will lead you to how to heal. So healing approach is always a function of pathogenesis. Each school of psychoanalysis has its own way of diagnosing certain things and healing certain things. So every school of psychoanalysis has its own pathogenesis and therefore its own way of healing. And diagnosis is one element of the entire pathogenesis process. So the diagnostic system is one important component of the entire pathogenesis subsystem, which is a subsystem of the entire system of the school. So initially, long back, psychoanalysis started with a diagnostic system which had just two parts, neurosis and psychosis. Neurosis, where you are suffering from something, but you have reality testing intact. The touch with reality is not snapped, it's not disrupted, it's not broken. In psychosis, the reality testing has been impaired or broken. Then psychoanalysis got into the second diagnostic system, neurosis, borderline, and psychosis, where borderline was something which had part neurotic symptoms and occasional psychotic symptoms. Thereafter, each school developed its own system. Take, for example, Lacan. Lacan's system goes into three: neurosis, psychosis, and perversion. So he divides essentially all sicknesses into three categories: neurosis, psychosis, perversion. And the mechanisms are different. On what basis he divides? Let us say neurosis, essentially the mechanism is of repression. That strong desires, unacceptable, unlivable, are repressed. So the core mechanism involved in neurotic categories of sickness is repression. In psychosis, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes. You're audible.
Yeah. So the neurotic represses. The psychotic is incapable of castration. And the pervert refuses castration. So in perversion, the core mechanism is disavowal. And in psychosis, it is the absence of the name of the father, or the inability to accept the castration by reality. So this is the way he would put. So in his idea, things like schizophrenia and even bipolar will fall in the psychotic category. The sadomasochism and perversion, what we call normally as perversion, that will fall under the perversion category. And the depression and anxiety, they will fall typically in the neurotic category. So we can see how a diagnostic system is completely different. So he classifies all of them into three: psychosis, neurosis, psychosis, perversion. If you go into the Freudian theory, and if, let us say, you were to create a Freudian DSM, then remove those chapters of DSM which are biology heavy. So you will end up with 17 chapters out of 22. And in 17 chapters, let us say you have approximately 5 sicknesses per chapter as a rule of thumb, let us say, just for supposition. You will end up with 85 psychologically heavy driven sicknesses. So you will have to divide in Lacan's diagnostic system all these 85 into 3. They have to collapse into the 3. There is no way out. Just as in CBT, if you have a set of core beliefs, let's say you believe there are 4 core beliefs, then all the 85 in DSM ultimately have to origin out of those 4. So they have to collapse into those 4. If Freud says that all sicknesses should collapse into narcissism, oral problems, anal problems, Oedipal problems, and death instinct problems. If Freud says this, let's say you want to combine early Freud and later Freud, you would have these 5 categories. If you take only classical Freud, you will have oral, anal, and phallic, or oral, anal, and Oedipal, and everything has to collapse there. But if you add 2 more, on one hand, narcissism, on the other hand, the death instinct-led problems, then you will have a 5-category diagnostic system in which these 85 have to fall. Similarly, if you go to Klein, she will talk about the paranoid schizoid fixation, envy, greed. As the core, if you go into beyond, he will add containment. Right? He will add attack on linking, and that diagnostic system will be different. So if you create a Freudian DSM, let us say, you will have part 1, oral issues, part 2, anal issues, part 3, Oedipal issues, and all the 85 will have to be fit in there as subparts of those parts. So multitude of diagnostic systems actually are possible. They actually are there. And in practice, they are used that
according to these methods.
Yeah. So they are used that way. In use, as far as the use in psychotherapy goes, the DSM is only taken as a reference point, but in practice, the use is of the diagnostic system and the healing system that the school believes in. You never go back to the DSM in the middle of therapy. So for psychotherapists, essentially, especially psychoanalytic psychotherapists, this is only a language of discourse with the other. It has nothing to do with the conceptualization or practice of that particular school of therapy.
So can something more be said on Lacan's system, because it seems he has an elaborate system?
Yeah, we can. In Lacan's system, he divides, as we said, everything into 3: neurosis, psychosis, perversion. And the core mechanisms are, in neurosis, it is repression. In psychosis, it is foreclosure. And in perversion, it is disavowal. Now, in simple words, what it means is, in case of neurotic, there are difficult desires and there is repression from the top. And this would include the mechanism at core, at work, in many cases of anxiety, many cases of depression, many cases of say
addictions.
Some cases of addiction, because addiction also will go into perversion, part of it.
Okay, part.
But if there is a repression at the core, essentially we are looking at hysteria, depression, things of that type. So the core mechanism is there is a desire, difficult, and there is repression. The second is the psychosis, where the core mechanism is foreclosure. And what it means is the psychotic is incapable of accepting the castration of the world. That the desires are so strong and the mechanism to accept castration of one's desires is not there. So he is incapable of castration. Even if he wants it, he is systematically incapable. Whereas in case of pervert, he is capable at times, but he refuses. At a deeper level, it's a choice of refusal. He disavows the reality. He disavows the prohibitions and taboos of reality. It's like everything goes. So the core mechanism is disavowal of limits of reality. He is capable of accepting castration, but he refuses to accept castration. Whereas the psychotic is incapable of accepting castration by reality. So this is the Lacanian system, and within the Lacanian system, you will put hysteria and depression in neurosis. You will put psychosis, schizophrenia, and even bipolar in psychosis, because the manic part displays, according to Lacan, some mechanisms of foreclosure. And the sadomasochistic activity and all acts of perversion, which normally we call it perversion, the conduct disorders, extreme forms of conduct disorders. Those are the areas that go into the perversion.
Lacanian.
So the three mechanisms are repression, foreclosure, and disavowal. And in the second one, the reality principle is not able to exert itself over the desire, sidestepping the will of the person. So the erasure of reality in perversion is by will. The erasure of reality in psychosis is a systems issue. It's not, it is sidestepping the will. Even if the psychotic doesn't want to be psychotic, still he continues to be the psychotic. Right? So
is it that the psychological structure is not capable of accepting the castration?
Yes. Because that acceptance, that capacity for acceptance is not there. Why is a deeper question as to why the psychotic is a psychotic. Why is he not capable of accepting castration? Is the pleasure associated with desire so high? Is the narcissism so high? Is the rage coming out from repression of desire, if he tries to do it, so high that it disintegrates completely the self? So there would be multiple answers, multiple group of people with different reasons as to why they are incapable of castration. In some cases, it may just be envy, which does not allow them to get into the normal processes of accepting castration. So this, when you go deeper into this category, each of the categories, each category has multiple causal mechanisms, which can be looked at from Lacanian point of view, also from other school point of view. So this is how we can look at the Lacanian system. And one of the things that he uses in technique is a variable session, where the session can be a fluid variable duration session. If he feels that you are going off track and it's not of use, he may terminate the session anytime. And if he feels that the session is going on well, he can extend the session. So, and because of this, I think he was removed from International Psychoanalytic Association. The core dispute was of the variable session.
So how will an appreciation of multiple diagnostic systems help the profession?
First, it opens up our mind that multiple options are available to us. We don't have to be fanatic, and we don't have to attribute omnipotence to DSM. It's a very useful system, but one of the many systems with its own strengths and weaknesses. Second, because healing is always a function of pathogenesis, and diagnosis is a key component of the entire area of pathogenesis. Therefore, if we can look at the same problem from multiple standpoints, we can understand the problem very differently. Like the same Oedipal non-resolution can lead to 5 different problems listed out differently in DSM. So the causal way of looking at a problem and the clinical descriptive way of looking at a problem are very different ways of looking at the same problem. Now, what DSM has done is very good, that being a-theoretical, it has been able to create a common language of discourse. Otherwise, every school will come up with its own DSM, its own terminology, its own language, and it's very difficult to then have a discourse. So it's very important that we realize that multiple systems are possible. You can look at the same thing from a different point of view. And in fact, that enriches DSM journey itself. Because the more we develop in each of the schools, the more material it comes into DSM. Like this time, there was an attempt to bring in cohesion insights into the diagnostic criteria of narcissism. And if you look at the diagnostic criteria, part of it, they do have a flavor of Kohut's work or the cohesion school, self-psychology school. So it is also mutually enriching. So this is very important that we have the idea in our minds. Diagnostic systems can be multiple, each with strengths and weaknesses, and DSM is one of many. And no system, as of now, is a strictly scientific system. I think this is very important to appreciate and spread around.
So, sir, does HEAT, your system, offer an alternative diagnostic system?
Yes, it does. As I was listing out, okay, the multiple diagnostic systems can be many. You have the old psychoanalytic system. You can have system based upon each of the school. You can have a system based upon CBT. You can have a system based upon Ayurveda. So Ayurveda goes into the Kapha, Pitta and Vata, Sattva, Rajas and Tamas. It goes into Agni. So within Ayurveda itself, you can generate 3 different diagnostic systems for mental health. Then we have Tantra, and there we look at the functioning of each chakra, energy is blocked or not blocked there, the flow across each chakra. So we have a different diagnostic system in Tantra. Similarly, HEAT has a different diagnostic system, where not only can you look at the Freudian and the Jungian integration, you can also look at each of the chakras and the elementals. So apart from using the integration of the classical psychoanalytic systems and Tantra, you can also have diagnostic systems based upon the functional elementals. So within HEAT itself, you can have a diagnostic system. You definitely have a diagnostic system based in HEAT, which uses the general causality model, which uses the schools of psychoanalysis, which uses the Tantra system, and which uses elementals of its own, even the imperative categories of Immanuel Kant. Okay. Like we saw last time, there is the epistemological categories which are used. They can also be used because if we find in a person, in the general functioning, some epistemological category is not doing fine, maybe we can start looking at that. Now, how to heal it is a separate question altogether, both within psychoanalysis and in a holistic framework. But you start off from somewhere, it's a good place to start off. And not only it offers a diagnostic system, in fact, it offers a CAT scan kind of thing. Just as in the CAT scan, you can see the living body functioning. Similarly, you can visualize the individual based in a larger society, in a historical time, in a cultural time, in a larger spiritual reality. And you can see how the whole flow is happening from the universal to the particular individual, and then how from bottom to the top the forces are moving. So in a metaphorical sense, we can visualize it. Empirical thing is far off. But in a conceptual sense, we can model the individual in the universe in terms of the width, and from elementals to the pathological phenomena from bottom to the top. So we take care of the width and we take care of the depth and the height. So this is the, and of course, diagnostic system is there based upon the general causality model, based upon elementals, based upon the epistemological working and the epistemological categories. So this is the way we can create one more diagnostic system to add to the basket of many which already are there.
Revealing and horizon opening discussion it has been for me. Hope our viewers liked it as deeply. See you all again. Thank you, Dr. Vaidya. Namaste.
Namaste.